Well, I've had my eye on the indie video game Dark Quest series for years, but Dark Quest IV was the first I really tried, looking like it might finally have the ingredients that I want for a Hero Quest-inspired dungeon crawl. My first hour or so with Dark Quest IV was really rough, but by hour 2 and 3, I was finding my fun with the game, leveraging both intended features and at least one convenient exploit. Having put in about 4 hours now, I'll share all of that and much more of my first impressions about the game, so hopefully you can decide if it's a game that you will enjoy. I'm Peter Franson from christiangeekcentral.com. The description from the developers reads, Dark Quest returns with its 4th installment, a turn-based strategy adventure inspired by the legendary Hero Quest board game. Enter a realm of perilous dungeons, cunning traps, and powerful magic as you lead your party of heroes against the forces of the Dark Sorcerer. The evil Gulak, the sorcerer's puppet, commands monstrous legions that stalk the night. Villagers vanish without a trace, stolen in silence, never to be seen again. Only your band of champions can stand against this tide of darkness and end Gulak's reign of terror. Embark on 30 handcrafted quests filled with tactical turn-based combat and deadly surprises, outsmart over 40 unique monsters, evade lethal traps, and wield both magic and steel to survive sprawling multi-floored dungeons that test your wit and courage. So I've been playing Dark Quest IV on the Xbox Series X. I do want to thank the developers for providing me with a code for review purposes. I think the developer's description, which is I just read from the Steam page, about the genre, the basic gameplay, I think that's accurate, although how tactical your experience is will depend greatly on the difficulty settings that you choose. More on that later. Although not all are unlocked immediately, you can use multiple character classes in your 3-member party that you take into a given quest, including Barbarian, Dwarf, Savager, Lancer, Knight, Wizard, Archer, and Fire Mage, and a couple more that you can also unlock a little deeper into the game. Each class also has unique skill cards that you can unlock through purchases between quests. And there are also vendors for consumable potions, weapons, armor, and other upgrades that are able to be swapped between party members between quests when you're kind of at the camp where all the vendors are. Turns in the dungeon are basically one action and one and your movement that you're allotted. Each character has their own speed value, which means how many squares they can move. Other cards can potentially be brought into the dungeon that don't require an action to use, but that's the basic structure. You can look at the stats for each enemy encountered just by highlighting it and clicking a button, which is helpful if you do want to keep the difficulty dialed up to know, okay, how many health points do they have, what's their percentage, defense, how many spaces can they move. But you can also have a light tactical experience with quick, easy decisions, similar to, I think, the mechanical weight of the Hero Quest board game inspiring Dark Quest IV. And as a lifelong fan of that board game, and one who prefers quick, simple choices in my turn-based combat, I do not dial up the difficulty, and I even lowered it from the default difficulty eventually when I realized you could do that. More on that point in a little bit. Although I wasn't able to test it, there does appear to be a multiplayer mode. I'm not sure if that's just couch co-op only, or if it's like over, the internet. But you can assign to at least a first and a second player which heroes are going to be controlled. I don't have more information, unfortunately, in my time with the game on how multiplayer works. I did have a rough beginning, as I said earlier, because of the lack of clarity and things that are not explained. So one example would be when you highlight an enemy for an attack at range, like with your bow and arrow or something, the text pop-up says choose space to move to. And I am baffled by that. Choose space to move to. It made me think I did something wrong, and I kept canceling out of the decision to use a spell or use a ranged attack. So I'm like, no, I don't want to move. I want to stay here. I don't want to be next to the enemy. Well, eventually, just through trial and error, I realized, oh, that's just a weird bit of text that they've chosen there. I'm not actually going to move. That's just the text that pops up. There are several little confusing things like this that made the nuts and bolts hard for me to learn, even though, once understood, this gameplay is really pretty simple. Descriptions on cards also leave out what would be really helpful info. For example, one card, you use it to target a tile, it says, and then the description of what happens when you target that tile simply reads 7 health and 1-4 physical damage in a line. Okay, I assume the health is for me, so I choose the tile that I'm on, and then I get 7 health. But then 1-4 physical damage in a line, what does that mean? I assume that's not hurting me. Do I get to choose the direction of the line? I haven't purchased that card yet, but that's all that I get in the store when I'm deciding where to spend my hard-earned precious gold. So I was like, this is not enough information for me to figure out if this card is worth it for me. Other cards will say, this card will be removed after you play it. And I'm like, removed? What does that mean? Forever? And I gotta buy it again when I get back to camp? No, you get it after the quest, but the game doesn't tell you that. There's also, like at least one minor punctuation error. A card reads 50% chance for your attack, comma, to remove all actions from the enemy. I'm like, okay, I think that comma's a mistake. I think it just means it's a 50% chance for your attack to remove all actions from the enemy. There's also some surprising mechanics, just under the heading, I guess, of what the game doesn't tell you. So one big surprise early on was that moving ends your turn. You don't get to choose to move first and then do an action. Once you move, your turn is over. But maybe not 100% of the time. There's maybe an instance that I felt like it was inconsistent, or I was still able to move and I was surprised that I could. But it seems to be the default that, like, once you move, don't plan on choosing an action after that. You're done. Also, there's a chance of attack with one character if you upgrade their skill to get this, of attacking at the start of battle. But surprise, surprise, what I didn't know is if that thing triggers and you need to move a few steps to get into line of sight, the game is just going to have your character move forward to get into position. I'm like, okay, well, that's cool, I guess, that you helped me out, but what if I don't want him? If I'm playing on a really difficult tactical mode, I'm suddenly going to spring forward 3 steps. That's not what I wanted my ranger to do, whatever. So just some surprising things can happen. Let's see, what's another example? There's only one of each potion card type that is sold. And they do describe this as unlocked, but I wasn't clear as I started the game, like, okay, I know that we're doing a board game thing here, and so you've got characters with cards, but it wasn't immediately clear that, like, some cards you could just use over and over again. They might as well just be like a little stat sheet that represents attacking, but you use your attack card, you don't lose it, you use it as many times, as you want throughout the dungeon and stuff, but some cards specify that they're passive, so they likewise just kind of sit in your character's hand, which represents their skills and equipment and stuff, and they don't get used up. And other cards will specify can use once per battle or once per maybe dungeon or something, or that's like the potions, you lose it and then but not forever. Anyway, but like there's a healing potion, and there's several potions that can heal you, but there's, a given healing potion, you just unlock that, and then one person can equip that in your party, not more than one, just one. You can, between quests, swap that potion between different characters, but so there's a little bit of abstraction in terms of how the equipment is treated, much like you run into in a number of board games. You earn gold, not XP, so that's very similar to Hero Quest in that regard. Gold kind of is your XP, and you use it to purchase upgrades for your character through training, or equipment, all of that. So it's kind of both gold and XP in a sense. Let's see here. Oh, here is a little surprise. If you highlight an enemy from a distance to do a melee attack on them, and you don't choose one of the arrow spaces surrounding it to specifically walk to before making your attack, the game will just auto-choose that for you. And it won't necessarily be the one you think is most sensible or most obvious. Another little tidbit. your characters get fatigued after a quest, after a run through a dungeon, unless you started at plus X health, which I'll explain how you get that in a second. But yeah, so you get defeated or fatigue, excuse me. So that's probably the game's way of saying, hey, spread out the characters that you use. You don't go in. These guys aren't ready to go back in. Use a different set of characters. Well, I don't like that. That's kind of like the Darkest Dungeon thing, and I'm like, I just like the characters I like, and I just want to play them. And I found a workaround very similar to Darkest Dungeon. But also defeated party members, if your whole party is wiped, your party, all those guys go back to camp. They're not dead or anything, but they're revived with half health. And that's regenerated over resting at the camp while other heroes go out and do missions. If you abandon a mission, or your party gets wiped out, you lose all gold that you gained in that dungeon, but you keep the gold you walked into it with. But after a party wipe, time passes back home. So that means that you get full health after one non-abandoned run passes, like characters that were at half health or at -1 because of fatigue or something. They're back to full health after one non-abandoned run, even if it ends in defeat, has passed. And if you wait longer before taking a hero into a dungeon, like 2 quests, then they will have bonus health. I've seen as high as +3 on some characters. So what does this mean? This means that, like Darkest Dungeon, you can go on what are often called suicide runs. You take the characters that you like and that need to rest, you leave them behind, and you just take your lamest heroes, and it must be a complete party of 3, and you have them go in, and then the first time combat starts, because you can't do this before combat starts, but the first time combat starts, just turn to each other and beat the crap out of each other until everyone's dead. Because yes, you can, once combat starts, attack your fellow party members. But I would say that suicide runs are probably unnecessary if you adjust the difficulty, which I did not notice this option. It appears on the screen where you select the quest, not as in the normal options menu and stuff. It's just up in the up right corner. There's a little button prompt that you can adjust the difficulty of the game there, for some reason there, instead of the options menu. You can, let's see here, you can replay dungeons that you've been in already to grind for more gold. That's definitely an option, and for me, on the default difficulty that I played on for most of my time with the game, I felt like grinding was necessary. Maybe because I just didn't have the patience for being really careful with my turn choices. I played the first dungeon probably about 10 times before beating the second. But I should say that by the last 3 playthroughs of that first dungeon, I was doing the whole dungeon in 4 minutes or less. They're pretty short, especially once you're a little over-leveled for them. But as I said, you can also adjust the difficulty at the Elder Quest, the Elder Quest selection screen. You can modify the health of enemies up or down, you can modify the health of heroes up or down, and then mysteriously, you can, as it's called, modify the attack value of heroes. That's the one that's weird to mess with, because modifying that for heroes strangely affects both the attacks for heroes and the attacks for enemies. Meaning that, yeah, you're going to have a massive damage output if you mess with the attack modification for heroes, but you're also going to have enemies doing massive damage to you. So, if you want something easier, then don't increase the attack modification for heroes. Dial it down to 0 for the easiest modification in that regard. I would say for suicide runs that you want to just get out of the way really fast, you actually want to put the hero health mod as low as possible and the hero attack mod at max, so that the enemies and you, as you're attacking each other, are doing massive amounts of damage and you've got very little health. It's just, you'll be in and out real quick. But then, you want to be sure and adjust those before the next time you go into a dungeon. Let's see. There are some miscellaneous, just kind of minor user interface issues. The button prompts are in some cases not highlighted. They seem kind of grayed out, like, oh, I guess that's not an option for me right now, but they actually are options for you. They just chose that aesthetic for some reason. Also, it is a static 2D art game, even though it's from a top-down, bird's-eye view perspective. So that means you can't rotate the camera, which most times is fine, but every once in a while the view is unhelpfully blocked. Now, for those just listening to this on the Christian Geek Central podcast, I think the visuals are solid. They're very HeroQuest inspired, as they have been throughout the run of this whole series. That, just slightly cartoony with a mostly serious sword and sorcery vibe to the character models, to the dungeon environments. There's some torture furniture in here that I'm like, man, yeah, this is looking dark. So very reminiscent of HeroQuest. Think Conan and the world of Conan more than the world of Lord of the Rings or something similar. Also, you can watch the video version of this review for footage that I'll put in at some point showing all of the character class stats and potential skills they can learn, as well as the items and equipment that you can buy, which can help fill in more details for you about the game, potential character advancement, and how each class plays differently. Alright, so 4 hours in. At this point, I am having a good time. Now that I know I can, if I need to or want to, lean on difficulty sliders to make things easier, I will likely make things actually a little tougher for myself, but easier definitely than the defaults. I'll probably stick with the classes that I like, but I may branch out if I were to do a second playthrough someday. I can't say for now that this one is likely to pull me away from other dungeon crawlers with more depth, like the Dragon Quest 1 and 2 HD 2D remaster, also very much dungeon focused, even though they do have some more town stuff, which this game has no talking in town, that kind of stuff, just upgrading and back in the dungeons, which is what I love about it. But even so, there are other games that kind of scratch the dungeon crawl, dungeon adventure itch in a more satisfying way for me than this one does. But if I finish those options, or borrowing those kinds of options in the genre, I think the $20 price tag here is a reasonable asking price, and half that would be a really great deal if and when it goes on sale, which I think it will because the other games in the series pretty regularly do. Finally, a common question among some more traditional Christians may be, what about the magic and sorcery in this game? Isn't that problematic given scripture like Galatians 5:19-21? Well, although I'd argue that fantasy magic is not what the biblical prohibitions are referring to at all, you might find an in-depth video I created a while back helpful to you as you sort through your thinking and the relevant scripture on that topic. The video is titled, Can Christians Be Evil in Games? And you can find it at the Christian Geek Central YouTube channel. And those are all of my thoughts for now on Dark Quest IV. For more chat about geek entertainment, answers to your questions, and news from the wider world of Christian geekery, get the Christian Geek Central podcast today on iTunes and other podcast services.